So the original fire started in pastoral land to the north of the Chewings Range of part of the Churchill West MacDonnell National Park. This fire was thought to be contained originally by the pastoralists that were there, but in the following days managed to spread into the park. Once it got into the park, it was burning in an inaccessible area, and the only option that we had available to us was to monitor the fire progression through the use of NAFI and also a few observational flights, which Parks and Bushfires NT staff were involved in. So the original fire is believed to have been started by lightning, been running for a couple of weeks, very slowly burning through the Chewings Range, across the Chewings Range and towards Heavy Tree Range. We ended up with a secondary ignition, a roadside ignition in the vicinity of Larapinta Drive and Stanley Casa. Fire was somewhat accessible for crews, and Bushfires NT volunteers and Parks and Wildlife staff attended the fire and tried to actively suppress this fire in its location. Managed to stop this fire crossing any further to the south of Larapinta Drive, but it did get into the ranges to the northern side and continued to run slowly through that area. Shortly after this, another weather event came through with a lot of lightning, and we ended up with multiple ignitions across the landscape, including new ignitions near Mount Zeal on Park, and also ignitions in pastoral land further to the north and to the west of Churchill National Park. It was decided that there were too many fires in the landscape to run individually, so an incident management team was established. The IMT was made up of Bushfires NT, Parks and Wildlife. Marty Krieg was the divisional commander for all work on Park.
3 separate fires on the park that we were monitoring and trying to manage. And by that stage, we obviously really understood that we needed to escalate the management of this one. Bushfires NT staff and others were brought in to help us manage the situation.
We also had Northern Territory Fire and Rescue Service within the IMT, and they were providing assistance in terms of structure and obtaining additional resources that could be used as required. And we also had John Gaynor working in the planning space.
I was initially brought in to assist with planning, and over the ensuing days, I also involved myself in some liaison with other stakeholders and also doing some logistics to ensure that we had the right equipment and the right actions taking place at the right time.
We worked through an OPESL analysis of the incident and realised to try and work out what the major risks were. And at this point, we realised that there was huge environmental potential from this fire. And so from the next day, flora and fauna were involved as well.
So I was called into the IMT to help with identifying those values of the threatened species, the plants and animals. But also I've been working extensively in the park and have a good understanding of the topography and the fuel loads and a few of those other things. So my local knowledge was really useful in that area for preparing maps and understanding some of the fire history of the park. Some of the experience from doing the fire aerial incendiary work with Parks and Wildlife, and we planned some large fire breaks to the north of Mount Sonder. So I was able to provide the high resolution mapping for those fires and some of the other historical fires in the area. That allowed the planners to have a better idea where the fire may carry through or be pulled up by those natural breaks. Churchill National Park is a haven for some of our threatened species. The central rock rat is critically endangered, and it's one of the few places that they still exist. There are other threatened plants and animals in the park, and hot summer wildfires is one of the threats to those species.
We had to think outside of the box a little bit as to how we were going to tackle it. One of the options that was put forward was to use aircraft to try and slow the spread of the fire. Unfortunately, due to the location, fixed-wing suppression aircraft are unlikely to be very suitable for that because of the long turnaround time to refuel and return to the fireground. One of the other options that was put in was to use a helicopter and insert crews closer to the fire ground. And we had to bring a helicopter from the top end, based out of Catherine, down to assist. And this helicopter had a 1,000 litre water bucket that we would also be able to fill up water out of any of the existing water bodies on site, to provide some extra protection for crews who were on the ground, away from support. The use of helicopters to insert crews in closer to a fire front is nothing new from a worldwide scale, but it's not something that's seen all that much in the Northern Territory, especially within NTG. So there was a lot of discussion about whether this was an appropriate response to the fire and how we were going to manage crew safety. So we looked through a whole range of different options and undertook an options analysis. And these options analyses were actually presented to the acting CE for sign off before we approved any of the work. The ways that we managed safety of the crews was to ensure that we had enough seats on the helicopter to be able to evacuate everybody in one flight if need be. But we also, like I said, had that multi-role capability with the helicopter so that we had the bucketing option or opportunity there that should fire flare up, the pilot would be able to drop some water in the immediate vicinity of the crews to ensure their safety.
There were several flights where we were doing aerial observations. So I went up with some of the Bushfires team and the Parks and Wildlife team, and we could see where the fire had been and the conditions that those fires had burnt through those areas, and got to have a look at the fuel loads ahead of the fire to be able to predict where those fires might be able to carry through.
There were quite a few volunteers to take part in the remote insertion to the fire ground. But after a full day of working and climbing out of the helicopter with putting a blower on your back and walking up and down over these hills, people were very much in need of a rest, and not too many people did more than one day at a time of working out of the helicopter.
Closing the trail itself is a fair bit of groundwork, just getting staff out into some of those remote access points and putting the appropriate signage up and that kind of thing. And obviously all the web updates and then the notifications to the commercial tour operators. I think overall, yeah, obviously it's disruptive, but we were actually pretty pleased in the end that I think most visitors, like some just independent travellers, were starting walks or intending to start walks at that time, and also the commercial tour operators, they were pretty understanding and obviously accept that forces of nature can't be controlled, and they understand that we're obviously trying to protect people's safety. So while it was disruptive, I think overall the public were pretty, responded well and were pretty positive about the situation, despite the inconvenience. Yeah, I think this fire was a great example of our agencies working really constructively together, and essentially everyone now really takes the view that we're all part of the same team. Whether you're wearing a Parks badge or a Bushfires badge, it doesn't matter. It's a really good working relationship.
A really positive experience to be part of a team that not only oversaw the management of the fire, but was able to see how successful the firefighters on the ground were in doing what is an extraordinary job.